What's up guys, my name's Liam and today we're going to be talking about the upcoming Finalmouse Ultralight X. The pre-orders are going to go live this Tuesday, August 1st at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And even though the pre-orders are going live, it is estimated that the mouse isn't going to be shipped and arriving till around up to 8 weeks. And since there's a lot of anticipation around the release, the mouse is estimated to come in around 33 grams for the medium size. It's supposed to be made completely out of carbon fiber and it has an 8,000 hertz polling rate. They're actually going to be releasing 3 sizes of the mouse. They're going to be releasing a small, medium, and large. The first drop, they're only going to be releasing one size. That's going to be the medium size, and it's also named the Lion. Pre-orders for the smaller size and the larger size are going to be happening later. And as far as we know, the Lion or the medium size is supposed to be the exact same shape and dimensions of the Finalmouse Starlight-12 medium. So for those of you that had questions about the shape, how it compares to other things out there on the market, let's jump into it. Alright guys, so here we have the Finalmouse Starlight-12 medium. This is in the Poseidon colorway. And I want to say that I absolutely love the shape on the Finalmouse. I like the medium, the small. These are definitely some of my favorite shapes out there on the market. Coming over to the bottom of the mouse, there is some curvature on the sides, but the sides overall, they feel a bit flatter compared to some other offerings out there like the Razer Viper Mini, Razer Viper, that has a little more aggressive curvature on the sides. Over on the top profile, it does feature a mid hump. However, I do feel like on the Starlight series that the hump, it feels a little bit more of a flatter style mouse overall. And we will be jumping into here shortly, but just for example, the Razer Viper Mini even sits a little bit taller than even the medium size on the Starlight-12. And one of the things I feel like is not very clear for people when it comes to the size of the mouse, I feel like though this isn't a larger style mouse, this is smaller than something like the GPro Superlight, for example. It's not really as small as it seems in the hands. And one of the biggest reasons for that is if you come and look at the back of the mouse here, it is a flat feeling, but it does have a pretty wide profile going from left to right from the middle of the mouse. And again, when you're holding this in the hands, it does feel just a little bit larger than it looks. And starting out here, if we were to look at it compared to the Starlight-12 Small, this is the last legend version right here. As you can see, obviously they're the exact same shapes. Obviously, it's also a little bit shorter. It's a little bit more narrow. The way the back profile is, how wide it is, I feel like the Small, in my opinion, feels a little bit closer to something like the Razer Viper Mini. And how wide the mouse does sit in the top of your hands, it does have a pretty obvious difference between these two. And the medium size for the Finalmouse Starlight-12 series was always a lot more popular than the small version. But for me personally, I do kind of prefer the smaller size just a little bit more. So next up, when comparing the Starlight-12 medium to the Razer Viper Mini Signature Edition, when you come over to the bottom of the mice, they don't look that different as far as the width goes. However, if you notice that the Finalmouse Starlight-12, it is a bit more flat where the Razer Viper Mini does have more aggressive curves. So towards the middle of the mouse, it does overall make the Razer Viper Mini feel like a bit more of a narrow mouse. And then coming over here on the side profile, they don't look that far apart when it comes to the front, but coming over to the hump does stick up higher, and it does make the Razer Viper Mini feel like a bit more of a taller mouse over the Starlight-12 medium. However, though the mouse does sit a little bit higher and is a little bit taller, don't let that trick you, because like I was telling you, when you come over the rear here, it's where you start to see what I'm talking about. When you go back and forth holding these mice in the hands, the Razer Viper Mini, it tapers off from the top middle of the mouse down to the sides much more aggressively, giving you a much more narrow feeling in the hands. And as you can see here, over on the Finalmouse Starlight-12 medium, it has a much wider top feeling. And just real quickly here, if I were to pull up the Finalmouse in the small, I do feel like the Finalmouse, as you can see here, it does feel a lot flatter. Obviously, since the Razer Viper Mini sits up higher than the Starlight-12 medium, it does sit up a lot higher than the Starlight-12 Small as well. The Razer Viper Mini does flare out more aggressively to the front and the rear of the mouse, but if you're talking at the very middle point here in the center, they feel about almost as wide as one another. And if you were to come over here to the rear of the mice, as you can see here at the top profile of the Finalmouse Starlight-12 Small, it does feel a little bit wider towards the top of the mouse, as compared to the Razer Viper Mini. And even though the Starlight-12 Small does feel like a little bit more of a smaller mouse, I really feel like these dimensions are a lot closer to each other, and they feel more similar to me when I'm holding them in the hands. And though they're not terribly far apart from one another, like I said, the Razer Viper Mini sits a little bit taller, and it feels like a bit more of a narrow and smaller feeling mouse. Next up, when comparing the Starlight-12 Medium to the Logitech GPro Superlight. If you are coming from something like a Logitech GPro Superlight, I do feel like though these aren't too far from one another, overall, just every dimension of the GPro Superlight, it feels wider in the hands. They both kind of have that flatter curve profiling from the bottom of the mice. Looking at them from the sides, the GPro Superlight sits up a little bit higher in the front. It definitely has a taller mid hump. And the way that the Starlight-12 tapers off more aggressively from the top mid hump to the rear of the mouse, whereas the GPro Superlight has a slower taper. Overall, the GPro Superlight just feels much longer in the hands. So if you are maining the Logitech GPro Superlight and you're interested in going over to the Finalmouse medium size, it is going to feel like a flatter and just all around a smaller mouse. Next up, when comparing the Starlight-12 Medium to the Razer Viper V2 Pro. The shapes of these two mice, they're not too far apart, but the Razer Viper V2 Pro, it does feel like a larger mouse compared to the Starlight-12 Medium. As you can see here over on the bottom of the mice, the Razer Viper definitely has much more aggressive curves on the side profile, and it feels like a wider mouse in the hands. On the top profile, as far as the height goes, they're not that far apart from one another, but the Razer Viper V2 Pro does feel like a longer mouse in the hands. It kind of tapers less aggressively to the front and back of the mouse, towards you can see on the Starlight-12. It's a little bit more aggressive, making the Starlight-12 Medium feel like a little bit of a shorter mouse in the hands. And though the characteristics of these two mice aren't really that far apart from one another, I do feel like the Finalmouse feels much closer to the Razer Viper than it does to the Logitech GPro Superlight. The Finalmouse Starlight-12 Medium does feel like a smaller mouse overall compared to the Razer Viper V2 Pro. And next up, when comparing the Starlight-12 Medium to the G-Wolves HTX. These mice do feel pretty similar to one another as far as the actual size goes. However, I do feel like the HTX does feel a bit smaller. If you look over here to the sides, they're about as wide as one another when it comes to the bottom of the mice, but the HTX, it does flare more aggressively. And then coming over here at the top of the mice, as you can see, the HTX just feels like it's lower and flatter to the ground, especially with your height that you have for your thumb. As you can see here in the front of the mouse, it is lower, and the mid hump, it sits a bit lower than the Finalmouse Starlight-12 Medium and feels flatter overall as well. In the rear, they do kind of taper off towards the rear, pretty similar to one another, so they feel almost equally as long as each other. And besides the HTX feeling a little bit more flat than the Starlight-12 Medium, it does feel more narrow in the hands at the top of the mouse, with how you can see here the HTX does taper off to the sides more aggressively, to whereas it's a less aggressive taper to the sides on the Finalmouse Starlight-12 Medium, ultimately just making it feel like a bit more of a wider mouse in the hands. So like I said, even though these mice are really close to one another, I do feel like the HTX does feel a bit flatter and just a little bit smaller overall. Next up, comparing the Finalmouse Starlight-12 Medium to the G-Wolves HTS Plus 4K. The HTS Plus does have a little bit more similar characteristics to the Razer Viper Mini. The HTS has much more aggressive curves that flare on the sides. It does make it feel like it's a more narrow mouse than the Finalmouse Starlight-12, and one of the biggest differences here with the feeling of the mouse in the hands is the HTS has this incredibly high center hump. So if you do prefer that center hump, it does make the Finalmouse feel like a much flatter mouse in the hands. But again, the same thing when we come over here to the rear. The HTS Plus sits much higher, but it does taper off more aggressively from the top middle of the mouse to the sides. So not only is it more narrow at the bottom of the mouse, it's more narrow at the top, and it does make it feel like a smaller mouse in the hands. And the best way I can describe the Starlight-12 when I'm holding it in the hands is it definitely feels like a wider and flatter feeling mouse compared to the HTS Plus. Next, we'll be comparing the Finalmouse Starlight-12 Medium to the VGN Dragonfly F1. Both these mice, they really do feel really similar in the hands. They're about equally as wide as one another. I would say that the VGN Dragonfly feels just slightly a bit more narrow in the centermost point of the mouse right here, but it does flare out more aggressively to the front and to the rear. Coming over to the top profile, they both have this flatter feeling on the top of the mice, but I do feel like the way that the VGN Dragonfly, it kind of tapers off less aggressively. It has like this flat plateau here at the top middle of the mouse. So I do believe it sits a little bit lower than the hump does on the Finalmouse Starlight-12, where as you can see here, it just goes straight from a gradual decline from the middle of the hump back to the rear of the mouse. And the biggest difference in the feeling between these two mice, as you can see here, same thing where the VGN Dragonfly does have a more aggressive taper from the top of the mouse down to the sides, where the Finalmouse Starlight-12 Medium just feels a bit wider at the top of the mouse. The shapes of these two mice are actually incredibly similar to one another, but I do feel like that the VGN Dragonfly just feels slightly like a bit more of a narrow and longer style mouse when you're holding it in the hands. Next up, when comparing the Finalmouse Starlight-12 Medium to the Darmoshark M3 4K. Honestly, there's not a whole lot to say about these two mice. They are pretty much the same shape. They have about equally the same type of curving going on the sides. The only difference, as you can probably clearly see here, is the Darmoshark M3 is a scaled up and overall just a larger version of the Starlight-12 Medium. It sits taller, it feels wider, it feels longer in the hands. And coming over to the rear profile, they are incredibly similar. I'm not sure if they're exactly the same. I kind of feel like there's a little bit more of a pointiness going on here on the Darmoshark M3, but overall they feel incredibly similar to one another. And as you can see from the side profiling these mice, like I said, the Darmoshark M3 is just overall a completely larger style mouse, comparing something closer to something like the Air 58. All right, and then finally, when comparing the Finalmouse Starlight-12 to the Vaxee XE wireless. To me, both of these mice, they truly feel very similar to one another. They don't have very much curves going on the side profiling. I do feel like on the Vaxee, it curves just slightly a bit more aggressively, but as you can see, they're not that far off from one another when it comes to the actual width. I would say that overall that the Vaxee XE wireless does feel like a bit more of a wider mouse. Coming over here to the side profile, as you can see, the Vaxee does sit a little bit lower towards the front. It does feel a little bit longer, but when it comes to the mid hump, I do feel like the mid hump on the Vaxee XE wireless does stick up just a little bit higher. But if you can look at the way that these curve off from the mid hump towards the rear, and even towards the front, they feel pretty similar to one another in the hands. Even when you come over here to the top profiling of these mice, they do kind of equally have a slow taper from the top of the middle of the mice off to the sides, and they do feel pretty similar as far as the width goes in the hands at the top of the mouse. Though these mice do have minor differences, they do feel pretty similar in the hands, but I would say that overall the Vaxee XE wireless to me, it just feels like a little bit of a larger mouse. Alright guys, so that wraps things up on my shape analysis of the Finalmouse Starlight-12 Medium. And for those of you that have been asking me questions about the shape of this mouse, I really hope that this video has helped you out a lot. If you feel like I've left anything out or you have any additional questions, please let me know down in the comments below. Aside from that, if you have enjoyed watching this video and you are interested in seeing more videos like this in the future, please drop this video a like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.